There is a type of disappearance that no one announces. It happens through small decisions, each with a reason, each wrapped in good intentions. Someone who starts answering for you at the doctor's. Someone who moves your papers to keep them safe. Someone who holds your bank card in case of scams. And you say thank you, because to object would look ungrateful, and you love the person doing it, and you're not even entirely sure anything is wrong. My name is Eleanor. I am 82 years old, and one evening, standing behind a door in the hallway of my own house, I heard my daughter whisper to her brother that I didn't realise I couldn't manage on my own anymore. It wasn't anger I felt first. It was something colder and harder to name, the particular feeling of becoming invisible while you are still fully here. I had lived in the same house on the edge of a quiet town outside Manchester for over 40 years. The same 3-bedroom semi that Frank and I had stretched ourselves to buy when the children were small, whose garden I had spent 3 decades improving, and whose rooms I knew the way you know the rooms of the place that is yours. It was the house where the children grew up and left, where Frank and I grew older together, where Frank died in the upstairs bedroom after the last of his 3 years of illness, and where I had stayed on afterwards because it was home and I had no reason not to. I had worked for decades as a school administrator, the person who kept the timetables running, remembered which parents to call about which children and in what circumstances, tracked the details that meant the place functioned rather than unravelled. It requires a particular kind of organised clarity to do that work well, and I had done it well for a long time. Then I had managed Frank's illness, the appointments, the medications, the consultants, the forms, the care plan, the final weeks at home because that was what he wanted, and I made sure it was what happened. I had managed the grief and the paperwork afterwards, the reorganisation of finances and household and routine for one person rather than 2. I was not someone who lost track of things. I was, if anything, the person others relied on not to lose track of things when they themselves could not. After the fall in the garden, I had caught my foot on the edge of a flagstone and gone down hard on my wrist, a nasty bruise but nothing broken. Claire had begun coming more often. She lived 40 minutes away and had her own full life, and I knew it cost her something to come. She was concerned, and the concern was genuine, and at first it felt like exactly what it was, a daughter looking after her mother after a scare. She stocked the fridge, sorted the prescriptions, stayed for dinner on Tuesday evenings, insisted I rest more. There was something genuinely warm in having her present more regularly. The house had been quiet in the particular way it gets when the life that had been in it is no longer there. If you have ever felt that the care of someone you love began, slowly and without any announcement, to turn into something that was harder to name, subscribe to this channel. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. But slowly, so slowly that I couldn't point to a single moment when it began, things changed. Claire started answering questions at the doctor's before I had finished speaking, not loudly, not rudely, but consistently, as if my response was something to be filled in rather than listened to. She told the neighbours that her mother was struggling a bit lately, and I only heard about it second-hand, and the phrase was more disabling than anything I was actually struggling with. She began moving documents to keep them safe, which meant they were in her bag or at her house, which meant I could no longer find them. She held on to my debit card in case of scams, which meant every transaction required going through her. Phone calls from old friends, Pauline, who I had known for 30 years, Daphne, who rang every other week, somehow stopped being passed along. Each of these things had an explanation. Each explanation was reasonable in itself, genuinely so, not as cover for something else. The concern was real. The love was real. But the accumulation of all those reasonable explanations formed something that was not reasonable at all. I was losing control of my own life, piece by piece, in the name of being looked after. And the particular difficulty with losing things this way, gradually, kindly, with good intentions, is that you can't point at it clearly. You can't say, this exact thing, this is what's wrong. You can only feel it, diffusely and increasingly, as a tightening of the space you're allowed to occupy. I began doing things that I hadn't needed to do before, checking twice whether I had locked the door, even though I had never forgotten to lock a door. Moving through conversations carefully, choosing words with extra attention, because I was afraid that if I stumbled on a word, someone would add it to a list I couldn't see. I had started to make myself smaller in my own house, and I had not quite noticed when I had begun. What hurt most was something I overheard by accident. I had come downstairs one evening to make tea and heard Claire's voice in the hallway, speaking quietly to her brother on the phone. She didn't know I was there. Her voice was tired rather than unkind. The voice of someone telling the truth because they believe no one who needs to hear it differently is listening. She said that I didn't realize I couldn't manage on my own anymore. She said it the way you state a fact, the way you describe weather or traffic, or the way a road is blocked. Calm, matter of fact, settled. I stood behind the door with my hand against the wall. I didn't go in. I stood there for a long moment and then went back to the kitchen. It wasn't anger that came first. Anger has a heat and a direction, something you can do something with. What came first was something colder, the sharp, particular sensation of being seen the way furniture is seen, accounted for, arranged around, present but not quite a participant. Have you ever felt that, still being there and yet gradually becoming someone that others discuss rather than someone they speak to? Tell me honestly. Eleanor had spent most of her adult life being the person others relied on not to forget things. The school administrator who kept everything in order, who held the information that other people couldn't quite track, who managed crises without fuss and without requiring anyone to notice that she was managing them. The wife who had navigated Frank's long illness, the appointments, the medications, the consultants, the forms, the hospice arrangements, the final weeks at home, the strange administrative work of grief that begins before the person has gone. She had done all of it, clearly and competently, and without dramatic self-pity, because that was the only way she knew how to do things, and also because Frank would not have wanted anything else. She had continued to do all of it after his death, the accounts, the house, the garden, the shopping, the medical appointments, the maintenance of a life and a home as a single person. All of it, alone, without asking permission from anyone, and without anyone suggesting she needed it. That night, she slept very badly. She lay in the dark of the bedroom she had slept in for 40 years and turned over thoughts she had not had to turn over before. About herself, about her own mind, about what others might be seeing in her that she couldn't see in herself. Whether she was forgetting things without knowing it. Whether the people around her could detect something that hadn't reached her yet. Whether in some way they were right, and she simply hadn't noticed. That last thought, the possibility of being the last person in the room to understand something that everyone else had already worked out, was one of the most destabilizing things she could remember thinking in a very long time. But she was not forgetting. She was not losing track of things. She knew precisely which bills had been paid and when, which appointments were coming, which medication at what time, what had been in the drawer before it wasn't there anymore. She knew the bank statements had not gone missing. She knew who had them. She knew the difference, clearly and without confusion, between needing more time to do something and needing someone else to do it for her. She held on to all of this in the dark, although in that particular kind of long, sleepless night, the things one knows with certainty become less firmly anchored than usual, and doubt moves in where clarity should be. Without telling anyone, without announcing it, without any of the gestures that make things larger than they need to be, Eleanor began to do things, one at a time, quietly, without declarations. She took the bus into town, alone, in the middle of a Wednesday morning, without telling anyone where she was going, and went to her bank. The young man who served her was straightforward and efficient. He asked what she needed, made the relevant changes to her account, handed her a printed confirmation, and said goodbye. He did not slow down his explanations. He did not use that particular patient tone that signals an adjustment has been made for the listener. He did not check, with an extra pause, whether she had followed. He treated her as he would treat any customer who had come in with a specific request and a perfectly reasonable expectation of having it met. The ordinariness of this, the simple ordinarity of being dealt with as an adult, felt unexpectedly significant after months of not experiencing it. She walked back out into the street and stood for a moment on the pavement with the thin November sun on her face. She made an appointment with her doctor herself, without going through Claire, without asking whether it was all right to go alone, without framing it as something that required coordination. She simply rang the surgery, gave her date of birth, and took the first available slot on Thursday morning. At the appointment, she asked directly and precisely about her condition, what the latest results showed, what the consultants had concluded, what she should be watching for, and what she shouldn't. Her doctor answered her, not with the vague reassurance that is sometimes offered to older patients as a way of not having to be direct, not with that slight increase in volume and pace of enunciation, but straightforwardly with the information she had specifically asked for, as if she were a patient who had asked a reasonable question and deserved a complete answer. Because she was. And she did. She walked home from the surgery rather than taking the bus, which took 25 minutes and which she had time for. The route went past the park, where she had taken Claire and her brother as children. She walked slowly enough to notice things. She rang Pauline, who had been waiting for her to ring, and said so immediately and without reproach, just said it plainly, as the kind of thing between old friends that doesn't need to be handled carefully. They talked for an hour and 20 minutes. Pauline did not ask how Eleanor was managing, did not ask whether she needed anything, did not frame the conversation around the scare or the fall or Claire's increased visits. She talked about her own sister's renovation, about a novel she had read and found both engrossing and fundamentally wrong about something specific, about a thing that had happened in the town centre the week before that she had found very funny. She asked Eleanor what she thought about several things. She listened to what Eleanor said all the way to the ends of sentences, without filling the gaps. Pauline was the first person in months who had spoken to Eleanor as someone whose opinions were worth waiting for. Eleanor hadn't noticed quite how much that had been missing until it came back. She resumed volunteering at the church charity shop on Tuesdays and Fridays. She had stepped back from it when the visits from Claire became more frequent. Some weeks it had been easier not to go than to explain why she was going out. She went back now without explanation. She sorted donations, staffed the till, talked to the people who came in, and occasionally to each other between customers. Nobody there spoke to her with careful patience. They spoke to her the way you speak to a colleague. She cooked Sunday lunch for the whole family the following week. A proper roast, the kind she had always made, with the timing and the detail it required. It took her longer than it once had, and she did not apologize for this. And nobody needed her to. She started keeping her own calendar again, in the same desk diary she had always used, which she found in the second drawer of the writing desk, exactly where it had always been. She had drifted into relying on Claire's phone for dates and hadn't noticed when it had happened. A few weeks later, at Sunday dinner, Claire interrupted her mid-sentence to explain what her mother was trying to say. Eleanor placed her fork down. Without raising her voice, without any of the jests that make things into scenes, she said, clearly, that she was still perfectly capable of saying what she meant. The silence that followed was brief and sufficient. Claire looked at the table. The others carried on, which is the right thing to do. And in that quiet, something was established. That Eleanor was not someone whose sentences needed completing. There was no dramatic conversation afterwards, no tearful apology, no formal accounting of what had happened and why. The change came in small adjustments, the way the change in the other direction had come in small adjustments. Incrementally, without announcement, one thing at a time. Claire stopped opening her mother's letters before she arrived. She started asking before making decisions that concerned them both. She passed along phone calls when Pauline or Daphne rang, rather than mentioning later that someone had called. She listened when Eleanor spoke at the dinner table, or in the kitchen or on the phone, all the way to the end of what she was saying, without filling the pause, without offering the next word. Eleanor still felt the ache of some evenings, when the house was quiet in a particular way it hadn't been before Frank, when the rooms felt large in a way they hadn't felt when they were full. She still felt the particular fear that comes with age. Not that she was failing now, but that she might, in time, in some form she couldn't yet know the shape of. She did not pretend that fear wasn't there. It was real, and real fears don't dissolve because you would prefer them to. But there is a difference between carrying the weight of your own aging and carrying the weight of someone else's version of who you are becoming. Between facing the things that are genuinely true, the body that is slower, the life that is quieter, the losses that are real, and being managed around a version of yourself that has been decided in conversations you weren't part of. Those two weights are entirely different. One belongs to her, the other had been put on her. And now, carrying only the first, she felt the difference clearly. She felt it on Thursday mornings at the charity shop. She felt it walking home from the surgery in November. She felt it every time she opened her own calendar and wrote something in it, or answered her own phone when it rang, or finished a sentence at dinner without anyone completing it for her. Tell me, when the people who love you start making decisions for you, hiding things from you, answering for you, quietly deciding who you are becoming, how do you find your way back to yourself? And how do you know when it's time to start?